The unshakable guardian. Jonah and Clara West had always believed that their 4-year-old Pitbull, Duke, was a gentle soul. Despite his muscular build and intimidating appearance, he had never shown an ounce of aggression. If anything, Duke had been their protector, their loyal companion, and now, the self-appointed guardian of their newborn daughter, Ella. But something strange had started happening over the past few nights. It began subtly, almost unnoticeable at first. Every evening, after tucking Ella into her crib, Jonah and Clara would retreat to the living room to unwind. Normally, Duke would follow them, curling up in his favorite spot near the couch. But recently, he had stopped leaving Ella's room. At first, they found it endearing. "He's just being protective," Clara had said with a smile. "Maybe he senses something we don't." Jonah chuckled. "Like what?" "Ghosts," he teased. But when Duke refused to budge from his spot beside the crib, even when Jonah called him with his favorite treat, things started to feel different. That night, after trying everything from bribing him with snacks to gently tugging at his collar, Jonah and Clara gave up. "Let him be," Clara sighed. "Maybe he just wants to be close to her." Jonah agreed, but deep down, something gnawed at him. Duke wasn't acting like himself. He wasn't just lying down near the crib out of love. He was standing guard. The silent alarm. The second night followed the same routine. Ella had drifted into a peaceful sleep, her tiny hands curled up near her face, breathing softly. Jonah kissed his daughter's forehead before turning off the nursery lamp, casting a warm glow over the room. Duke was already inside, positioned near the crib. This time, Jonah and Clara didn't try to move him. But something felt different. Duke's ears were perked up, his body tense. He wasn't relaxed like usual. He was alert, watching, waiting. Jonah felt a chill run down his spine. It was just a normal night, wasn't it? There was nothing to be afraid of. And yet, as he watched Duke, something in his gut told him that the dog knew something they didn't. Hours later, well past midnight, Clara woke up to the sound of a low, deep growl. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The noise was coming from Ella's room. Jonah woke up immediately at the sound of Duke's growl. He had never heard him make that noise before, not like this. It was guttural, steady, almost warning. Without a word, the couple rushed down the hallway. They reached Ella's room, hesitating just for a moment before slowly opening the door. Duke was standing in front of the crib, legs stiff, muscles tight beneath his sleek black fur. His gaze was locked on the nursery window. Jonah followed his line of sight, but saw nothing. Outside, the backyard was quiet. The moonlight cast long shadows on the grass, the old oak tree swaying gently in the night breeze. There was nothing there. No movement. Still, Duke remained motionless, his body tense as if he was waiting for something to happen. Jonah felt a shiver creep up his spine. Something was wrong. A mother's intuition. Clara, still half asleep but now deeply unsettled, whispered, "Jonah, do you think someone's out there?" Jonah didn't answer immediately. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it just Duke being overly protective? Was he sensing something that they couldn't? Or was there actually someone outside? "No, I don't think so," Jonah said, trying to sound reassuring. "But I'll check anyway." He walked over to the window and peered outside. The backyard looked the same as always. Familiar, empty, nothing unusual. Still, Duke didn't relax. His eyes followed every movement, his breath slow and controlled. Jonah placed a hand on Duke's back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong?" Duke didn't even blink. Clara was now standing by the crib, looking down at Ella. The baby stirred slightly but remained asleep, oblivious to the unease in the room. Something about the whole situation made Clara's stomach turn. She had always trusted Duke, but tonight, the way he was acting unsettled her. After a long silence, Jonah finally sighed. Maybe it's just his instincts kicking in. He's always been protective of Ella, and maybe he senses something harmless, a raccoon outside, or the wind. Clara nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "Let's check the baby monitor footage in the morning," she suggested. "Maybe we'll see what got him all worked up." Jonah agreed, but as they left the room, he turned back one last time. Duke still hadn't moved. A growing suspicion. The following night, the same thing happened. As soon as Jonah and Clara put Ella to bed, Duke took his place near the crib. This time, he didn't just stay. He pressed himself closer to the crib, as if shielding the baby with his own body. Clara watched him carefully. She could feel something was off, but she couldn't explain why. "Jonah, something isn't right," she murmured. Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. "You're overthinking it. Duke loves Ella. He's just being Duke." But Clara wasn't so sure. That night, she barely slept. When morning came, she grabbed the baby monitor and scrolled through the recordings. At first, everything seemed normal. Just a quiet nursery, Duke lying next to the crib. But then, around 2:37 a.m., something changed. Duke's head suddenly lifted, his ears twitching. His body stiffened. Then, the screen flickered slightly. For a brief second, a shadow passed across the baby's room. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "What is that?" she whispered. Jonah, who had been watching over her shoulder, frowned. "It's probably just a trick of the light. Maybe a car passing outside." Clara wasn't convinced. Duke had reacted to something, and if their loyal dog, who had never shown fear, was alarmed, then maybe they should be too. Taking a deep breath, Jonah grabbed his phone. "Let's set up the security cameras," he said. Clara nodded, gripping his arm. "And if it happens again, we call for help." Jonah didn't argue. Something wasn't right. And somehow, they knew Duke was the only one standing between them and the truth. The unseen presence. The next night, Jonah and Clara were prepared. After seeing the flickering shadow on the baby monitor, they had set up additional security cameras around the house, one in the nursery, another overlooking the backyard, and a third by the front door. Jonah had insisted that it was just a precaution, but deep down, Clara knew he felt the same unease she did. Duke, however, needed no convincing. As soon as they placed baby Ella in her crib, Duke took his position beside her. His large frame, dark and steady, stood as an unshakable barrier between the sleeping infant and whatever unseen force seemed to be drawing him to her room. This time, Jonah and Clara didn't try to move him. Instead, they sat up late, watching the monitor feed on Jonah's phone, their nerves stretched thin as they waited for something, anything, to happen. And when it did, they almost wished they hadn't looked. A silent warning. It was just past 2 a.m. when Duke's body suddenly tensed. On the baby monitor, they saw him lift his head sharply, his ears twitching in alertness. He sniffed the air, then let out a low growl. Clara's stomach dropped. "What is it?" she whispered, gripping Jonah's arm. Jonah didn't answer. He was already rewinding the footage. Then there it was, a faint movement near the window. At first, it was barely noticeable, a flicker of darkness against the dim glow of the moonlight. But as Jonah slowed down the footage, it became clear. A shadow. Not a person, not an animal. Just a presence. It moved unnaturally, sliding across the nursery wall, then vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. Clara felt her breath catch. "That's impossible," she whispered. Jonah's jaw clenched. "It has to be a trick of the light." But Duke didn't think so. On the monitor, they watched as their loyal dog positioned himself even closer to Ella's crib, his entire body rigid. His deep brown eyes never left the window. Whatever was out there, he could feel it. And that terrified them more than anything. A gut feeling. "Jonah, I don't like this," Clara said as she paced their bedroom. "Duke has never acted like this before. He knows something we don't." Jonah rubbed his face, exhaustion weighing heavy on him. "I know. But what do we do? Call the police and tell them our dog is acting strange. Clara stopped pacing. I don't know, she admitted, but I do know that I don't feel safe. Jonah sighed. Let's wait one more night. If anything happens again, we call for help. Clara hesitated, but she nodded. Still, something deep in her gut told her that they might not have another night to wait. The breaking point. The following evening, the tension in the house was suffocating. Clara spent the day distracted, double-checking the locks, making sure every window was shut tight. Jonah, though he tried to hide it, was on edge too. And Duke never left Ella's side. By the time night fell, the air in the house felt different, charged, heavy, almost as if they were waiting for something inevitable to unfold. And then, just past 3 a.m., it did. Jonah woke up to the sound of Duke barking. Not a playful bark, not even a warning. It was the kind of bark that sent ice through his veins. He bolted out of bed, Clara right behind him. Down the hallway, Duke was already in full guard mode, standing in front of Ella's crib, his lips pulled back in a snarl. His fur bristled along his spine, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. And then, a thud against the window. Clara gasped. Jonah spun around just as Duke lunged forward, barking so fiercely that the sound echoed through the nursery. Another thud, this time harder. Jonah rushed to the window, but when he pulled the curtain back, there was nothing there. Nothing. Just the empty backyard, swaying trees, and the cold night sky. But Duke still wasn't calm. His barks turned into deep, rumbling growls, his eyes still locked on the window. And then, Ella started crying. Clara rushed to the crib, scooping their daughter into her arms, whispering soothing words to calm her. Jonah, heart hammering in his chest, turned back to the baby monitor footage, rewinding the last minute of the recording. His breath caught. There. For just a split second, something moved past the window. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was just a shape. A dark, shifting shape. And it had been watching. No more waiting. Jonah didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed his phone and dialed. The moment the dispatcher answered, he forced himself to sound calm. Something strange is happening outside our house. We need someone to check it out. Clara held Ella tightly, rocking her back and forth as she watched Duke. He was still standing in front of the crib, still ready, still waiting. Jonah hung up the call, turning back to his wife. They're on their way, he said. Clara nodded, but neither of them felt relief. Because whatever was out there, it wasn't finished yet. The revelation that changed everything. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Jonah, Clara, and Duke remained frozen in the nursery, the tension in the air thick enough to suffocate. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, and Ella's soft breaths as she slept once more in Clara's arms. Then a sudden sharp knock at the door sent a jolt through them. Jonah grabbed his phone. That must be the police. Clara followed closely behind as he rushed to the front door. Duke, ever the guardian, stayed back, still positioned near Ella's crib, his ears twitching at every sound. Jonah opened the door to reveal 2 uniformed officers standing under the porch light. "Sir, we received your call," the taller officer said, scanning the area. "You mentioned something unusual happening outside." Jonah nodded. "Yes, it started a few nights ago. Our dog, he's never left our baby's side. And tonight we heard something, a noise at the window. We checked our security cameras, and there was something there. But when I looked, nothing was outside." The officer exchanged a look with his partner before turning back to Jonah. "Do you mind if we check the footage?" Jonah handed him the phone, pulling up the baby monitor's last recording. The officer's face remained unreadable as he watched. Then his brows furrowed. "This shadow," he murmured. "It moves too smoothly, almost like it's Before he could finish his sentence, Duke let out a deep warning growl from inside the house. The officers immediately stiffened. Jonah turned toward the hallway. Duke was now standing at full attention, his body rigid, eyes locked onto something unseen. Then, without warning, a loud crash came from outside. Clara gasped, clutching Ella to her chest. The officers immediately drew their flashlights and rushed toward the backyard. Jonah hesitated for only a second before following them. His heart pounded with each step, the cold night air biting at his skin as they rounded the corner of the house. And then, they saw it, a presence beyond sight. There, near the window of the nursery, stood an old, towering oak tree. Its massive branches stretched outward, and as the wind blew through them, shadows danced against the house. At first, it seemed normal. Just a tree. But then, the officers' flashlights flickered, as if something unseen had brushed against them. Jonah felt the hair on his arms rise. One of the officers took a step closer, his face unreadable. He shined his light on the thick, gnarled trunk, only to reveal something carved deep into the bark. A name. Ella. Jonah's breath caught in his throat. "What is this?" he whispered. The officer ran his fingers over the etching, his expression unreadable. "It's old. Probably been here for decades." Clara, now standing behind Jonah, clutched his arm. "But why? Who put it there?" The second officer spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. "I think your dog knows." Jonah turned sharply. "What?" The officer looked toward the house, where Duke was still standing guard by the window. "I've seen cases like this before," the officer continued. "Not something you'd find in a police report, but something you hear in stories. Real, unexplainable stories." He gestured to Duke. "Your dog, he's protecting her from something. Maybe not something physical, but something that lingers, something from the past." Jonah felt a lump in his throat. "But why?" Clara whispered. The officer hesitated before answering. "Maybe something happened here a long time ago. Maybe someone lost an Ella. And now, your daughter," he gestured toward the house, "is triggering something that never truly left." A cold shiver ran down Jonah's spine. Clara's grip on his arm tightened. "But what do we do?" The officer smiled slightly. "Nothing." Jonah frowned. "What do you mean, nothing?" The officer's gaze flickered to Duke once more. "You already have a protector, the guardian that never left." That night, Jonah and Clara sat together in Ella's nursery, watching Duke as he lay beside the crib, his deep brown eyes flickering with a quiet sense of duty. Whatever had been outside, whatever had once lingered in the past, Duke had sensed it, and he had made sure it would never come near Ella. The next morning, Jonah and Clara made a decision. The oak tree had stood for years, watching over the house. Maybe it held memories, maybe it had once been a place of sorrow. But now it was their home. And Duke. He would always be Ella's protector. The nights that followed were peaceful. Duke still refused to leave Ella's side. But this time, his body was more relaxed, his eyes softer. Whatever had been there was now gone. And in its place was family. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.